Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's version of DevOps Derek Weekly. I'm DevOps Derek, also commonly known as just Derek. And today I have Microsoft Azure DevOps MVP, Matteo Emili on with us. Hey, Matteo, how are you today?
Hi there, not too bad from a rainy London today.
Yeah, I'm in just outside of Glasgow. It's been pretty similar. It's been very foggy. I was interested in watching the dog. I was out with the dogs earlier on, and with the fog, it was actually quite hard to find them. So obviously, it's similar up here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's been a bit rubbish. So today we're going to be talking about Azure DevOps. Can you share a little bit of what we're going to be talking about?
So the idea that I had is that very often people just confuse, first of all, DevOps in general as a product that they can buy, install, and use. And it's not like that. That's the whole premise of the story is that DevOps is definitely not just a product, but actually the product side is the last one that we should really talk about. And then just to talk a little bit about how we get from an idea to an actual deployed application, because sometimes there seems to be a tendency of just focusing on a specific portion or a specific problem rather than thinking things from like Azure DevOps. In reality, not something that's fairly often covered, I would say, especially whenever you try to introduce the concept and introduce the practices. So there are things that are very common, of course, but there are others that are often overlooked. So I just want to give a little bit of a whirlwind overview about this.
Awesome. I'm really looking forward to this. So you've got a screen. So should we just jump straight in and have a look at Azure
Yeah,
DevOps then?
let's crack on with the screen then. So usually, what happens is that people forget that applications and even just a sprint, right? If you're working Scrum and you're working sprints, you usually forget that you have ideas behind you, and those ideas they're usually recorded in one or more backlogs. That's something that's very often forgotten because more often than not, developers just tend to jump in on a sprint planning. You know that there will be some PPIs, some user stories that will get to the cut, that will get into a sprint, and then people will start working on this by the requirements and by working with what they've got. So what I think it's very important to remember that even if you start like you're in a backlog, you are in your backlog, and your team is actually seeing these list of user stories in isolation, they do not really make sense, right? Because aside from the fact that we go from a user story to not even a user story with some cooler than 1546 in the middle. But the thing is, more often than not, especially if you're in big teams and big organizations, developers only see this side of the story. They only see this facade. They don't know and they potentially ignore about all the rest. And all the rest usually starts with a strategy. So if you start using a product like Azure DevOps, you should definitely start tracking your stories and your strategy directly into the product. You don't want to use that. You want to use Trello. You want to use Jira. Be my guest. But remember to show your developers and your development teams visibility over what happens and over the rationale behind certain decisions. So in this case, obviously, my various user stories, features, and everything that that allows me to actually work on a number of fake items that represent that. But if you think about it, right, if you could just go down to stories and then you show all the parents, you should always remember that regardless of what the user story is about, strategy. If you are a startup or you are a Fortune 100 company, you still have a strategy. It's not like we're doing things just because, for fun or whatever. Yeah, we might be, but in general, if we do things, especially at work, We do them for a reason. And that reason is more often than not forgotten because you don't have visibility over the whole story. And that's where Azure DevOps is so powerful, because it allows you to pick up something and go and trace back at the history of that something. Like, for example, if we pick up a user story, the very first one, you can definitely see that it's a child to a feature, and it's a child again of a strategic item. Now, if you take this in isolation, it doesn't really make sense because it's a hierarchy, right? You have so many hierarchies. But in reality, you know that this a user story will actually have potentially some connection with another user story, or with a not so useful user story, or even with some groundwork that will be required for a different strategic item. Forgetting this means forgetting about why we do things. So I talked with a friend of mine a few days ago, and he was complaining about the fact that his team was feeling more like a factory, a production line of code, rather than a proper team, like a series of individuals working together. Partly because of the virtual environment, we can't do anything about it. The two of us are virtually right now. We're not meeting in a single place. We don't have anyone looking at us in person. I mean, I don't think we do. And it's a state of things, right? It's the state of play. It's where we are today in this day and age. But at the same time, it's important that whenever we do something, either in an open source project or traditional corporate 9 to 5 job, we do things for a reason. And that's something that very often forgotten. Tools like this help us in understanding why we do certain things. Like, for example, if I open this user story here, you can immediately see that, yeah, it's empty. There's no description, there's no acceptance criteria, no planning whatsoever. Fine. But you see that you have some relationship, you have some links, you have something that shows, oh, where I'm doing this because of that reason, right?
Yeah. So that's the thing. Like Azure DevOps, I think one of the things that I sometimes get, people seem to think it's like a misconception. They seem to think it's a single product, but Azure DevOps is actually like 5 or 6 different products all lumped in together. Is that correct?
I completely lost the stream, Derek.
Yeah, sorry. So what I was saying there was, most people seem to think that Azure DevOps is a single product, but in actual fact, when you get into Azure DevOps, it's actually 5 or 6 different products all within the single one.
Absolutely. Even if you look at a single project, right? You will go into a single project and you see that you have 5 different services you can choose from. Like in this specific case, I'm not using artifacts. I'm not using test plans. Away they go. And if I go back to my project, they no longer exist.
Yeah, I like that. I do like the fact that you can turn stuff off and on.
Absolutely. And integrating them is the real fun part, because you have things like, aside from obviously Azure Repos, that's plain Git, so straightforward to integrate anywhere. But if you start looking at things, Azure Pipelines is extremely powerful. And then you start looking at the number of things that you can actually integrate with Azure Pipeline. So aside from my Azure subscription, but the sheer amount of services that you can integrate, they're not just Microsoft services, actually, I think they're the minority in this day and age, but you can integrate it with anything from Subversion up to Kubernetes. And the fact that on the pipeline agents themselves, if you use the Microsoft hosted ones, you've got Maven, you've got Gradle, you have Ant, you have every single thing that you can think of in a development role. That's absolutely mind-blowing, if you ask me.
Yeah, you're pretty much. It's funny. I actually work at Octopus Deploy, and one of the things that we actually have a plugin that you can use with Azure DevOps to actually integrate it with Octopus as well. So it does things like, you can use it for deployments, you can use it for CI. So like if you've got Jenkins and you're moving over, you can continue using your build and push it in your build from Jenkins into Azure DevOps, or the opposite, actually replace Jenkins as well. That's where it's super flexible, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And that was one of the things that I realized when I was studying for AZ400, the certification exam. I used to be involved with DevOps and ALM before that, since around 2007, 2008, thereabouts. And it used to be very different. It used to be all about the platform. It used to be all about the fact that you have services very tightly coupled amongst them. Right now, you see, I can pick and choose anything here. You want to integrate it with GitHub? Easy. Do you want to integrate with Bitbucket? Straightforward. Do you want to integrate with GitLab or anything else? Easy. It's no longer like it used to be in the early noughties. And the way that the industry has changed makes this extremely easy, especially for people that are new. I've got an apprentice in my team, and she's absolutely brilliant. Okay, she's an absolute brilliant engineer. And the fact that she doesn't have any visibility over these, let's say, legacy stuff, legacy problems, that makes me think about how the industry as a whole became something easy to use, easy to consume. I remember talking with another friend of mine, and we're pretty much kids back then. And we thought about this fact, we could have, instead of having gatherings, get-togethers in the same place where it could be difficult because we're all scattered around the world. What we could do is just having, having virtual connections and having those virtual conferences of things like that. Back then, we barely had Skype, and webcams even, they were not anywhere as common as they are today.
Yeah.
The fact that we came up with, we were very both of us into IT and things. And back in the days, I remember fiddling around live communication server. So that should tell you pretty much around period. Playing with live communication server and trying to set up something that could have been consumed from between different regions of the same country. That was absolutely something out of the world. This day and age, my team is completely distributed. I've got people from Germany. I've got people from all parts of the UK. I had people from Ireland, people from India, people from anywhere. We can easily work together. So the amount of, how much we improved as an industry is beyond belief. And things like Azure DevOps, now, back in the days, in Foundation Server 2005, 2008, it used to be almost strange that you had all of these tightly integrated services together. If you think about it, having version control system, a build server, a place to track all your work, and a place to track potentially documents and stuff. It used to be a SharePoint integration back in the days. It was, it was extraordinary because otherwise you had no ways of doing that. Today, you can cherry pick from a list. Say, okay, I want this. This is in my shopping cart. I can get it on. Boom, done. Easy, straightforward. That's really good.
It's definitely something that I saw where I think like 10 years ago, the norm was to not integrate stuff. It was like almost make it painful to integrate. Whereas I think the last 10 years, it's like integration. It's a bit like when you look at Microsoft. Microsoft used to be quite anti-Linux. Now there's more Linux running on Azure than there is Windows. And I think that's where, because I remember using TFS and it was terrible. I hated TFS. I remember looking at it in 2008 and I compared it with sort of other stuff, and then I kind of looked at it again. I remember because I looked at it at the time, it was about 2011 again, and new job, new tools, and I looked at it and I was like, wow, this is completely different. I went for a slightly different, I went for Team City and Octopus and a few other bits for my DevOps and CI/CD. But when I've been using Azure DevOps the past 3 years now, and it's like so easy now because build and deployments used to be hard, whereas now when you've got Azure DevOps and other tools there, it just makes it so much easier. They are so much easier than they used to be.
I so agree with you. And again, if you take an example, right? So let's say that I'm a developer. I'm actually going to start working on a user story. Okay, fine. I want to create a branch potentially for that. I can do it from here. I create my branch, or even better, if I go into my Git Git repository, this is the code that I've got from the project. I create a new branch straight away. Let's say feature. You use feature branches, right? So you don't have long-lived branches, but you go to short-lived branch, feature branches, you integrate them straight away. Easy, nice to do. You pick up your code, you're already into your branch, and then, easy. you just have to, for example, you go over here and you say, okay, hi Derek, this is my change, fine. I don't need to worry about anything because I know I don't only have the code in my repository, but I also got my infrastructure definition. So
Yeah.
I can go end to end with infrastructure, and I also have my pipeline in here. Okay. So what I can do is to actually just pick it up, work on it. And I know that if I make a change here, okay, and that's not the right way because I'm just adding everything, but I'm just thinking if I want to do things quickly, if I want to do things in a way that's simple and straightforward, then okay, I can do it. And I can add all my files and the commit message. And I can push it directly to the remote. Now, behind this, I believe it's extremely strong, the level of abstractions we have. Okay, so what I'm doing is checking out to a new branch. This is plain Git, so it doesn't have anything to do with Azure DevOps. But I check out to a new branch. That's all local, right? Because I know that if I go on master, move to master, master is aligned with the remote. Feature is not. Okay, the branch I created is just local. I add all the files that I changed. Then I commit my change, fine. And then I push to the remote. Over here, there's a decent level of abstraction, right? And that's all about this story. It's all about the information. I'm pushing to a remote with a feature branch that doesn't exist. But the fact that the tool makes it easy, I know everything about it, but I try to think about people who don't. And if you are new to the trade, you're new to the industry, having to deal with things like local repositories and remote repositories, and the fact that you don't have a one-to-one mapping potentially between branches, that can be quite confusing. I've been through this conversation for a while now, and it can be difficult sometimes. So the fact that you have this abstraction, I think it's extremely powerful, and it shows so much about how we went on as an industry. Then it comes the tool. And if I want to add a link to an existing branch, right, for my feature branch, straightforward, I can just do it. Or I could have even done that there straight away. If I get into my feature branch, then I can see all the story about my files, and I can use it. I can use this view to actually do pull requests all the time, and I tend to use this interface a lot because I think it's easier and it's straightforward rather than opening up a code editor, context switch. It's expensive and so on. So let's say that you have your code here, right? Brilliant. Okay, now you want to integrate it because that's what we should do. We create a pull request because now, let me save this. So we create a pull request because we're using feature branches, but we are protecting the master branch. And that's what we should do all the time because otherwise we risk losing control over our code. We get a pull request. These pull requests, out of the box, simple, easy, and also it will have some rules. Let's take a look at the rules for a second. If I'm going to create a pull request here and I want to commit to master, obviously I can't commit to master. So what I need to do is to adhere to the rules. And the rules say that my master branch is actually protected by having a minimum number of reviewers, one where I could also approve my own changes, one-man band over here, right? So I can do that. But I also need to have linked work items for traceability. And that's important because it happened to me and it happens all the time. 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, you hit a bug and you need to retrieve how that bug came out and what was the implementation behind it. And if you have members of a team changing or leaving or coming in later, it's not always easy. It's not always straightforward. And unfortunately, as developers, sometimes we lack in the documentation side. So I think it's important to have this kind of traceability required because it will allow you to actually understand months or years down the line why certain things were done. And then obviously build validation, because that's the most important thing. You need to make sure that everything can be integrated, and you need to make sure that you can actually consume your stuff. So if I go from my feature branch into my master branch, one file, simple, straightforward, one commit. I can add myself as a reviewer. That's absolutely fine. There is one work item here to be linked. It's already linked. Good, fine. Create my pull request. Now, this, as simple as you can see, it's a big safety net. If you're in a real team, if you are in a situation where you actually have people doing pull review as they should be done, this is a lifesaver. Okay, I run through multiple pull reviews every day, and I tend to add lots of comments. I tend to add, lots of remarks and potentially rejecting a few of them because I would like to do certain things. But nobody's going to be any better than having a build running behind the scenes and having someone else looking at your code. In my team, even myself, if I push something, I'm never going to be allowed to review it.
That's That's such a good idea. And to be honest, for people who are new, and you may be new to Git, you may be new to Azure DevOps, even if you're doing this in your own instance, set up PR pull requests. Big thing, like for instance, like we're the same. We at Octopus, we use GitHub. It's built on the same idea. Nothing can be committed to main without there being some, even if it's you approve. Like there are certain ones where we use our own approval. Things like docs and stuff like that. But like that, yeah, if we do, you definitely use PRs. It's really good practice, and it will, because see, one of the things that I remember when I did it, I always used to commit straight to master, but it just gives you a more kind of production, almost like lifelike. So if you are doing this as a test, definitely set up and use pull requests, because once you get to it, then it will just become second nature.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you've got control and you can use policies to control how all that works. Because that's the thing, is like Azure DevOps. Like one of my favorite things with Azure DevOps is the approval gates and pipelines. Like for instance, that's once you're deploying it, that's one of my favorite things, because it's just take a second. Because we've all been there, and you've committed the wrong code to the wrong branch or something like that, and it goes wrong.
Spoiler alert, Derek. So
sorry.
This pull request, like every other build in this specific demo, will need some approval before it runs into production. And that's again, this is a very simple scenario. Okay, this is a scenario of a developer or a development team working on a web application. They can run stuff locally. Okay, so I could run .NET run here. Okay, let me do it. I don't mind. We can have .NET run here. It runs. I go to my application. Simple, straightforward. So I can pick it up. Localhost, simple.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the old one because I moved to master. Silly me. It's
very nice. I like it though. It's the thing is just giving some. It's funny though. I've used this in the past, and then you use things like Git flow, and it does add overhead, but it's overhead that's worthwhile. Just actually having that really does help out, and that's really hey, hello.
Big fan of pragmatism. Keep things simple. Okay. Yes, Git flow might be the good answer for some. GitHub flow might be a good other answer for some. Just choose what makes sense for the team. That's my number one priority. Okay. I'm never gonna force anybody down a certain path if they don't feel confident going in there. Stuff like versioning and the workflow that you follow for developing, that's something unparalleled, okay? Because what we want is actually making sure that the team is able to express all of their potential. So if you put too much overhead on a team, they're not going to perform. And that's, it's inevitable, because why should you do something well if you don't like doing it?
Yeah.
That's the way
and the thing, and also what you're also planning to do is, like for instance, like I remember when Git flow came out, I was like, I started adding it to everywhere, and I was like, this is great. And then when you actually look at it, it kind of sucks, because it's not great for web apps, so it's not the answer for everything, but have some form of control and some approvals in there, because without that, it does get a little bit wild west. Because that's the thing, is if you don't put it in, then it's more. It's not that people will try and get around it, but you want to have something that's worthwhile, but not too much. And the thing I love, actually, and one of the things that you did show earlier on, was obviously how you've got your Azure pipeline and YAML. I'm not a huge fan of YAML in general. It's pretty frustrating to work with. But what I like about this is you can effectively set up your build and then reuse the same YAML over lots and lots of different over lots and lots of different projects. Because one of the things is what I find is most builds are fairly similar. Obviously, there'll be certain things that you can't do, but I would say 80 to 90% of builds are, if it's .NET Core, then it's going to have a lot of similarities to another .NET Core. And that's one of the things that I really like. And also the fact that you've got your infrastructure, you've got your CI, and also your application all under a single solution, which is awesome.
Yeah. So what happened here, right? Simple. We had my build. The build is in progress. I will approve it. Absolutely fine. The build is still in progress because I'm waiting for my acceptance. So let's accept this, first of all, and then let's see what happened. So what happened is that, first and foremost, I deployed my application to a staging slot. And if I go at the moment to the other one, I should be in time. Yes. So this is still the old version. Okay. Application was running, but then I pushed the change. What I did was, let me close this, don't need that anymore. First thing, I run a CI build, straightforward, .NET Core application build, .NET Restore build. I publish my web application package, and then as a best practice, if I use infrastructure as code, I always publish is because I want to make sure from the history, from Git, you can do it, but nobody's going to beat something like this. You know that build number 23 has got a problem. What are the artifacts that were deployed to it? Well, I know there was this application drop and this infrastructure file. You can't beat that, all right? It's just, it's just the simplicity of it and the fact that trying to understand what happened, trying to understand what version was it, and try to retrieve it in whatever way. If you have many teams, well, if you have a team with many people working together, it might not be as straightforward. So just as a best practice, I always publish what the build consumed. And then we've got a staging stage with two jobs. The first one is an infrastructure as code job, and this is literally a job, okay? So this doesn't have anything to do with the target deployment, but given that I'm targeting Azure, what I'm doing is running my ARM deployment. Now, this is something that I would have done regardless in any stage. If you look at production, I do infrastructure as code refresh, and I do it because it's important to make sure that you have no drift. The easiest way to make sure you have no drift is redeploying your infrastructure as code. It might be extreme, but in this specific case, simple web application with team working on a feature branching model and pretty much CI/CD to the end, straightforward, and it doesn't lose a beat. Once you are done with the IAC deployment, then you go into the actual deployment, and this will target a stage. So in this case, the staging stage, and then down the line, the deployment stage. This is specific to the actual target environment. So if I go into Azure DevOps, I've got full end-to-end traceability on my changes. You see, I can pick up this. I know that at this specific point in time, there was a deployment. The deployment was successful on staging. There were no work items linked to it, to the actual deployment. I know that there were changes, though. So I can look at the changes. Oh, brilliant. I can look at the changes. I can see what changed. I can see everything about it and everything that's got to do with my deployment. In this case, simple change. It could be so much more. If I had a virtual machine or a Kubernetes cluster, I could have had traceability down at resource level. But in this case, platform as a service, not particularly bothered. It just works. And if I want to have full end-to-end traceability, this is the way. Because if you have multiple environments, you don't want to go on production, this is where it was working or this is where it failed. In this case, I want to go check this, and this is the one in production. Behind the scenes, what happens is that you have your infrastructure, sorry, your YAML pipeline. Okay, so it's a single file. I could have used multiple files. I could have done it in so many different ways, but in this case, simple demo. This is the first stage. This is the build. It's got one job. That's the CI job, and it's going to run .NET restore, .NET build, and .NET publish. This is .NET CLI, okay? .NET Core CLI. So I don't have to be worried about using something that I don't really have on my local machine. I can't reproduce it. This is plain CLI, okay? Just a mapping between the command and the syntax. But aside from that, it's .NET restore, plain and simple. Then I move on, and I will publish my web project. So I'm going to also publish the infrastructure, like I said, to a specific artifact drop, and then I will upload the package that I created. Again, this is a simple demo, simple example. So I've got my path hard-coded in here, even if it's on the pipeline workspace. That's because I decided to go this way with the simplest, frictionless story. But again, you can customize it at will because you have total control over the paths that you're using anyway. And then that's where things get interesting. So two jobs per stage. So production and staging, they both have two jobs. The first one, like I said, is an agent job. So it runs on an agent like Ubuntu latest. Okay, so that's something that runs over here, and it will run directly against my subscription in this specific case. It's going to run my ARM file with the ARM parameters file, and it's going to be incremental. So it's going to be a simple incremental deployment. The reason why I'm using a deployment job rather than a regular agent job is because I want traceability within the environment. So it's going to run again using the same agent, but it's going to target my environment called staging. And there, I'm going to use a deployment strategy of running once. So it's going to just run. This deployment is going to happen, and I will have just a simple deployment to my staging environment. Same story for production. Now, when I ran the pipeline before, there was an approval. The approval is bound to my environment. So if I pick up the environment and I go and take a look at the approval, then you see that I have an approval, direct approval on the environment, and I can add any other type of checks, that it can be pre or post deployment. So it could be branch control, it could be business hours, it can be an exclusive lock, so access to resource one stage at a time, or using, for example, a required template. So your YAML pipeline needs to extend another approved governed template that the organization has got. You have a huge number of choices here, right? Once you do this, if you go back to the pipeline straightforward, you go back to it, you see all the three stages as green because I approved that, and yet again, same set of jobs over here, but I also have traceability over the fact that there was a check that was passed because Matteo approved something 7 minutes ago for production deployment on production, and we also got an email for that. That's the whole end-to-end story. It's simple, but the amount of information that we have and the amount of abstractions that we managed to introduce with Azure DevOps, it makes it extremely simple for anyone willing to consume an end-to-end story that's not just version control and then passing the buckets to someone else.
Awesome. No, I really enjoyed that. The thing is, I think what you've done here, Matteo, is you've kind of pulled everything, from that single line of code update, and then you've got the full approval, everything in Azure DevOps. It's the thing I really liked is you've shown exactly how you can map ticket IDs. You can, then from push it in and then take it right through your full CI/CD pipeline.
And it works, as you can see.
Yes. And that's it, hello, Matteo. So yeah, no, honestly, that was really great. And to be honest, like you've taught me a few things as well, Matteo. Right. Well, I think that's it. Obviously, like that, you've pulled something together really cool here.
Last thing I wanted to quickly talk about
Yeah.
is what happens if down the line you need to trace it back. You need to
Yeah.
track it back. So you open the user story, you see that I have a feature branch and the pull request. From the pull request, you can get in there and see, okay, aside from the fact that this pull request is not yet complete, so let me complete it. But what happens here is that, yeah, pretty much. So you have all the history. So even if you lose the source branch, which can absolutely do, but what you get is not just that. You get connection to a work item. You have the pull request with the changes that were introduced, but you also have the traceability of the approvals, so who actually approved things, and and the fact that you have a build that worked on that and it was absolutely fine. So it was green. You see, build master. You can get in there and you can trace it back to the actual deployment that happened at a certain point in time. If you want to rebuild the story of these 6 months down the line, you can do it. 12 months, you can do it, and so on.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I like the fact that you can cherry pick and revert. So
Oh
if
yeah,
you do find that there's something bad in it, you can go in, you can revert that back to before and then redeploy it, and then everybody's back up. And, we all make mistakes sometimes. So it is nice to
oh yeah,
have that, to have that to revert back to.
absolutely. But yeah, that's what I believe is the most powerful feature over here of any. I mean, this is for Azure DevOps, but if you have a process, if you have a tool, you have a platform, whatever, the most important thing is traceability. Because code, fine, brilliant. You can have brilliant code, you can have brilliant documentation, everything you like. But if you don't have traceability, information will get lost. And if you lose information, then you're losing the whys, what we talked about at the beginning. Why is
But
that line of code something like that? Why
yeah,
is that feature deployed like this? That is why.
yeah, and the thing is as well, like, people leave businesses, they move on to other companies. So, developer X may leave and actually using something so you can see exactly why they've made that
Yes,
decision. It always helps as well.
all the time, all the time.
Right. Well, I think that's it. Unless there's anything else you want to show or talk about, Matteo.
No, I think that's pretty much it. I just want to have this conversation because it's a topic that keeps coming back. So I thought it was worth spending half an hour talking about it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you very much. And just if you are new to Azure DevOps, it's effectively free. You can check it on dev.azure.com. You can sign up, break it. I know that's how I got into Azure DevOps. I broke it a whole bunch, and then managed to fix it. That's how I generally learn, is by not doing it right. Take from that what you will. But yeah, you can jump in. You can do that. Obviously, there's lots of sample. .NET Core applications that you can do. You can obviously set up something similar to what Matteo's got, and you can do things like host your own build agents. There's so many things you can do with Azure DevOps.
If you want to get started straight away, you can just create a new pipeline.
Yep.
If you look at the amount of templates that you have, then it's literally a role for you open for anything from traditional .NET desktop down to Gradle, anything really.
Yeah. And obviously, one shout out is you can also, as part of your deployment, you can also use Octopus Deploy as well. I know that I'm a little bit biased. It's one thing I'm a little bit weak in is the deployment, is because I always just kind of revert back to Octopus because it's what I know. So yeah. Honestly, that was awesome. I learned so much, Matteo. Thank you very much. Just a quick heads up, just before we finish up for the day. I'm not about next week. I'm going to take a break next week. I'm taking a long weekend with my wife, so I'll be back on the next one. So that's today's the 9th. That would be the 16th. So 15th. So yeah, I'll be back on the 22nd or 21st. So yeah, honestly, Matteo, thank you so much. Also, do you have Twitter? Any sort of shout outs that you want to make?
No, just reach out on Twitter if you have questions or anything, or through the blog. Very happy to get questions all the time.
Yeah, so you're on for Twitter. You're Matt VSTS. Well, obviously
Yep.
Azure DevOps never used to be known as
Yeah.
Visual Studio Team Services.
Yes, and it goes even back even more because it used to be Visual Studio Team System back in 2005, and that's where it started.
That's it. That is funny because obviously I did start using it. At least it's not so safe. Let's be honest. But yeah, thankfully it is much better. But obviously check it out. There's loads of great stuff out there. Obviously, just get in touch if you need anything. And Matteo, thank you very much for joining us this week.
Thank you very much for hosting me, and enjoy your long break.
Awesome. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye, everybody.